And I want to show you that the book of Revelations repeats itself. We're going to start on chapter 6 and 13. Chapter 6, we have the four horsemen. The white horse represents peace, but he goes out to conquer. So that's like yin yang. This is the Antichrist. Calls for peace, but goes out and conquers, takes your oil, takes your gold, whatever. The red horse, this has been coming together for a long time now. We call this the BRICS nations. These are all the red nations. These are all the nations that fight against each other. Chapter 13 explains a little better. Who kills by the sword will be killed by the sword. Who leads into captivity will be led into captivity. This is all talking about war, and then we see the results of war, the black horse and the pale horse. We also see down in chapter 13 of chapter 6, verse 13, stars fell to earth, and if we look at 13:13, the beast makes fire come down from heaven. Now we have more proof of this, who this actually is. If we look at chapter 13, verse 11, we see that a new beast comes out of the earth who makes an image to the first beast, which was a seven-headed dragon, which is Europa. It was Europe, named after Europa, the woman who rode the beast. And so we see that this second beast with the two horns, Texas and Florida, made an image to the first beast, the seven-headed beast, which was all the world's powers throughout time, and that's called the United Nations. We know that the United Nations is an image to the world powers. Now we can move on to chapter 7 and 14. The similarities here is it's talking about the 144,000. Both of these chapters are talking about the 144,000. They're very similar. Now in chapter 7, we see that an angel came down and cried with a very loud voice. And if we look at 14, verse 7, he was saying with a very loud voice. It's almost the identical verbiage. Now if we go to chapter 8 and 15, we see the same thing. Chapter 8, the angels preparing with trumpets. In chapter 15, they're preparing with vials, and they're going to spill. This is the wrath of God. And so 8 starts with the stars coming down and burning mountain cast into the sea. Chapter 15, the sea became as blood. Chapter 8, the stars fell on the river. Chapter 15, the rivers became as blood. Chapter 8, trumpet and the sun, and in the vial, the scorchment of fire from the sun. So it's all very similar. And then at the bottom we see that the angel descends with the key to the bottomless pit, and then in the other chapter 15 we also see the same thing, the seed of the beast. And so extremely similar. Then we can move on to chapters 9 and 16. Chapter 9, they loosed the angels from the river Euphrates. Chapter 16, and the waters of the Euphrates dry up. Chapter 9, the number of the army was 200 million. Chapter 16, and they were gathered in Armageddon. Same thing, same thing. It's repeating itself. Now we can move on to chapter 10 and 18. And in chapter 10, we see a mighty angel. In chapter 18, having great power. Now, if you look at the bottom of chapter 10, it says, and he said unto me, thou must prophesy again before many people, nations, and tongues, and kings. So chapter 10, verse 11 tells you, you must prophesy again. This is where it repeats. This is where it starts over. It's a very short time. We're already 3.5 years into it. We had the peace deal January 1st, 2020. We had Israel go to war 3.5 years later, exactly. And now we're entering World War III. And this is going to be the Black Horseman, and then comes the Pale Horseman. It's not something that happened a long time ago. These very similar, same thing taking place. It all fits together. I could put all of these verses into one set of verses that it would be exact same verbiage. It's not different. There's a few different trumpets to vials and stuff like that, but I'm telling you, it's the same story. And we're halfway through it.
On the other, the figure of Moses leads us directly to God, and thus to the transcendent dignity of the human being.
claim that the Pope plans to open 5 portals on Christmas Eve during a ritual that has never been done before in recorded history. What's the significance of the timing here, and could this act be actually opening demonic portals under the guise of religious ceremony?
Malachi was supposed to have the vision, and he was supposed to have seen the popes who would reign over the church until the second coming.
Purportedly, what Malachi had created was a kind of prophecy over the course of the next 112 papacies.
Until the final one, the 112th line, that he names Petrus Romanus.
The whole way the Petrus Romanus is written is a time of trial and tribulation.
There's been evidence that either the prophecy was inspired or it's being followed like a roadmap.
It does seem to have a track record of predicting the future.
Pope Francis is the 112th pope. He is the final pope in the list.
As the legend goes, Malachi made a pilgrimage to Rome in 1139 AD, where he had an audience with the Pope. After his meeting with the Pope, he had a vision.
And this is where tradition says that the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. And it was almost a judgmental prophecy. So the prophecy of the popes is that under inspiration, he writes down a series of 112 lines in Latin from the time of Pope Innocent II to the final pope, 112 lines, each one of them signifying in order the next pope that would come along until the final one, the 112th line, that he names Petrus Romanus, or Peter the Roman.
The thing that makes this very interesting is that the vision of the very last pope involved what most biblical scholars would call the end times, and it seems to forecast the destruction of Rome even.
The final line in the prophecy of the Pope says, "There will sit Peter the Roman, who will nourish the sheep in many tribulations. And when these things are finished, the city of 7 hills will be destroyed, and the great and terrible judge will judge his people." The end.
Enemy against whom we're going to build a space-based weapon system that he thought was a ridiculous idea, unnecessary and very dangerous, not to mention too costly, etc. The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the enemy. In fact, when I met him in '74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified, and that was soon to follow. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids, we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie. A lie.